And tonight, that speaker happens to be Warren Brown. Warren Brown is a native West Sider. He's a proud 1972 graduate of Western Hills High School. Go Mustangs! He joined the Reds as a bat boy in 1970 when he was still at West High, courtesy of our friend from right up the street, Mr. Bernie Stone. And he stayed with the Reds for 3 years, and then when he left, went to Miami University. Boo, Oxford. But he has a lot of stories to tell us about his time at Crosley Field and Riverfront Stadium. So how about giving a warm welcome to Warren Brown.
First of all, I want to thank Alan and the Delhi Historical Society for inviting me and giving me an opportunity to tell my story as Bat Boy of the Reds. Now, you guys know about the Big Red Machine, right? Everybody raise their hands. Remember the Big Red Machine? There you go. Okay. So I feel like the Big Red Machine is the best team ever in Major League Baseball history. And I've had some discussion with some Yankee fans about that. And they will claim otherwise, but I say when you look at baseball, when baseball was integrated, took a while for that to integrate after Jackie Robinson, the Reds were the team of the 70s. Now, right after the 76 season, free agency started. So I'll tell my Yankee friends, well, you were a great team back in the 20s and 30s, and you were a great team when you got to buy all the World Series champions. So that kind of shuts them up sometimes. Not all. So how many of you remember Wade Hoyt? We lived in Clarksburg, West Virginia, and we would get the Pittsburgh Pirates, Bob Prince on KDKA. So you would think, well, I would grow up as a Pirate fan. But actually I grew up as a Reds fan because we had cousins in Cincinnati who would come over and visit them. And so I had to wait until the sun went down with my transistor radio, as you all remember. And I could get the Reds on radio and listen to Wade Hoyt. And I was one of, I'm sure many of you, that loved when there were rainouts. And Wade would tell his stories. Nothing better than that. Got to work at Crosley Field, my favorite ballpark ever. Saw my first game at Crosley Field on August 13th, 1963. Got to see a pretty good pitching match up there. Jim Maloney and Juan Marichal. Jim Maloney beat the Giants, shut them out, pitched a complete game. We all remember what complete games are, right? Or were. Also in that game, two other guys that would play a role in my future played in that game. Pete Rose for the Reds and Willie Mays for the Giants. I went down in Lexington at the Reds chapter of the Hall of Fame to hear Jim Maloney talk a few years ago. And I pulled up this picture, and I felt like it was a great picture of Jim pitching in Connie Mack Stadium. And actually, there's a picture of Jim pitching, and Pete's playing third base. So I presented this picture to Jim to sign it, and he proceeds to tell me, I remember that game, it was in Connie Mack Stadium, and he said, I was throwing so hard that the scoreboard caught on fire. This is a picture of my mom, strongest woman I've ever known in my life, also a big baseball fan. She attended her first baseball game in Forbes Field, and one of her favorite players was Robin Roberts. So my mom was a registered nurse down at the U.S. Public Health Clinic, and she was the head nurse down there. Well, late in the 60s, you remember the USO would send people over to Vietnam, and they had a headliner, Mr. Coffey, Joe DiMaggio, and they called the Reds, and they said, we would like to have Pete be the other big headliner to go on this tour, and of course Pete said yes. Well, the only place in the whole city that Pete could get all the shots to go to Vietnam was my mom's clinic, who worked with the military and the FBI, so they had all the shots. And so my mom kind of pulled rank. Now, I didn't know any of this was going on. But she pulled rank and said, when Pete comes in, I'm giving him his shots. Well, Pete had to come in, and I was very grateful of that. Pete had to come in every day for like 2 weeks to get shots. So sometime during that period, my mom got up enough nerve or enough gumption to ask Pete, hey, I've got a son turning 16. He's a huge baseball fan, a huge Reds fan. Is there anything down at Crosley Field that he could do? And at the time, she's thinking, I just want to get this guy out of the house, get him down to the ballpark so he's going to be happy. And she's thinking selling peanuts or popcorn. Well, I'd have been happy with that too, you know. But anyway, so Pete says, well, I'll tell you what, I will call you when I get back from Vietnam. Here's a picture of Pete and Joe in Vietnam. And of course, Pete's had some things to say about his trip to Vietnam, how it changed a lot of his views about things. So everybody my mom worked for said, Pete said he's going to call you back when he gets back from Vietnam. Yeah, right. He probably gets 100 requests a day. No chance. At least you ask, and that'll be the end of it. Well, sure enough, Pete gets back from Vietnam, calls my mom, and said, got a number of a guy that you need to talk to. That happened to be Bernie Stowe, the equipment manager. Yep. Bernie Stowe was my first boss. Great guy, was like a second dad to me. I grew up without a dad. And every good thing you've heard about Bernie is 100% true, if not more. I had the privilege to work with 3 people during my days as Bat Boy that I've never heard anybody say a bad thing about. And that's Bernie Stowe, Sparky Anderson, and Joe Nuxall. So Bernie leaves his tickets late 1969. Great seats, but I don't get to see any of the game. I did look up on the computer and on Baseball Reference and did find out that the Reds lost that game that he left the tickets to. But I didn't get to see any of the game because Bernie picked me up in the first inning, took me back to the Reds clubhouse at Crosley Field, and then took me back to the seats in the 9th inning. And Bernie made me a job offer. First of all, he wanted to know, just talking and getting to know if I was going to be the right guy for the job. Bernie said, well, got a good job offer for you. You're going to work long hours, it's going to be hard work, and you're virtually going to have no pay. I said, where do I sign up? I had the best job the next 3 years that anybody could have. This was a picture of the Reds clubhouse in Crosley Field. It was cramped, it was hot, there was no air conditioning, it was musty, it was a cinder block house, but it was the best place a kid that's 16 years old would ever want to work. Last game at Crosley Field, most of you remember, back-to-back home runs by Bench and Lee May beat the Giants. And then the Reds moved to Riverfront Stadium. Now when we moved to Riverfront Stadium, it was so important Bernie, who used to go on the road trips, never went on that particular road trip to Houston because we were busy moving everything from Crosley to Riverfront. And when we got into the clubhouse at Riverfront, there was no carpeting laid. They were still putting in the players' lockers. We had to sleep on equipment trunks because at the time, they still had a pretty major rat problem down there. And those rats by the river were pretty big. So we had a couple baseball bats and we took care of a couple rats. Now the Reds clubhouse was carpeted. It was air conditioning. We had a sweeper that we could use rather than brooms. It was first class and we thought we went to the Taj Mahal. And it was about 5 times the size of the old clubhouse at Crosley. Now the new clubhouse at Great American is about 10 times the size of the one at Riverfront. 1970 All-Star Game. I was not on the field Bat Boy, but I was in the clubhouse. And boy, talk about watching all these All-Stars come in. And talk about being awed. Now, before I came to work for the Reds, Bernie had a discussion with me and gave me some great advice, since he was a Bat Boy for the Reds. He said, when you first walk into the Reds clubhouse on opening day, he said, I'm going to give you 15 minutes to be in awe. But after that, I'm paying you. Now granted, I'm paying you very little, but I'm paying you very little to work. So I took my full 15 minutes of being in awe when I walked in that clubhouse and saw the Reds' new manager, Sparky Anderson, and all the players that we used to go see at Crossley Field, the Petes, the Johnnies, the Tonys, Tommy Helms, Lee May. I was just, it was something to walk into that clubhouse the first time. Everybody remember probably the most famous play in All-Star Game history, Pete and Ray Fosse. This is when the leagues really wanted to beat each other. It wasn't just an exhibition game like it is now, because the National League president came into the clubhouse and talked to the players before the game and told them how important it was for the National League to win this game. And the players knew that too. So Pete scores the winning run, runs into Ray Fosse. They both get injured. Now Pete never missed any games. He missed the next 3 games because of a bruised knee. Ray Fosse did not miss any games immediately after the collision. But my personal story here is afterwards, Pete's in the training room, and I'm in the clubhouse, and all of a sudden I hear him call my nickname, which was Brownie. And he's yelling for me, and I'm trying to make my way through the mass of reporters. And he said, go get me a Coke. So I had to go back to, on the other side of the clubhouse, to the room where they had the Coke stored, and get him a Coke, and then weave my way back through the mass of reporters to give him a Coke. So that's my story on the 70 All-Star game. I love this picture. This is Hank Aaron and Willie Mays at Riverfront before the game. So I had a brief experience with Willie Mays after the game. Reds win, the National League wins, extra innings, but we've got to now get all the players packed up and ready, and they've got to fly out to meet their respective teams for the second half of the season. So just by total chance, total luck, I happen to be packing up Willie Mays. Well, there were 2 bat companies back then. There was Adirondack and Louisville Slugger. Adirondack had given each one of the players 2 memorial bats that had Riverfront Stadium, Cincinnati, Ohio, 1970 All-Star Game. And I'm getting those ready to be packed up for Willie, and Willie looks at me and says, oh, they gave us 2. Well, I only need 1. He said, you want the other one? What am I going to say? No? So that bat is on loan at the Reds Hall of Fame. I don't have it here, but you'll have to go down to the Reds Hall of Fame to see it. So we go to the 1970 World Series. Granted, it didn't end very good for the Reds because their pitching staff was in pretty bad shape. But the one story I have about the 1970 World Series is, and that was the first plane trip I ever got to fly on. So I'm flying on the Reds charter to Baltimore, which is pretty cool. So we got checked into our hotel in downtown Baltimore, and the 3 of us, there was Mike Long, the Reds on-the-field bat boy. There was myself and Jim Warnke. And Jim worked in the clubhouse along with me. And Mike and Jim were from Elder, by the way. So we get in there, and we said, well, we're going to go out. It's downtown. And the front office, the front desk said, no, you boys, this is not really a great area. You boys really don't need to be going out at night. You're only going to get in trouble. So we stayed in our rooms. Well, there was a knock on the door a couple hours later. So we opened the door, and here is Tommy Helms and Jimmy Stewart. If you remember Jimmy, super sub. They have a case of beer for us. Now, the statute of limitations is over because I was 16, so everything's cool now, right? So they said, here's some beer for you guys. We know you can't go out. He said, go ahead and enjoy it, but don't drink it all in one night. I think we probably did drink it all in one night. There's a picture of the 71 team picture. I'm the shortest guy in the picture, right next to Bill Cooper, who was the Reds trainer at the time. But I much prefer the 1972 picture because the Reds have a new trainer now, Larry Starr, if you remember Larry Starr. And I was a little bit taller than Larry, so I was pretty happy about that. Sparky, what can I say about Sparky? You know, I remember newspapers after Dave Bristol got fired, Sparky who? We exchanged Christmas cards every year until he passed away, and I still have those Christmas cards. And now everybody had a nickname down in the clubhouse. Usually it was a variation of your last name, although not always. But mine was Brownie, which was pretty easy. But Sparky always called me Warren. So I kind of think that's kind of special. There's a picture of my first two bosses. Sparky was in for a book signing, and so there's Sparky and Bernie and me in the picture. Now, I don't know why this happened in 1972, but both the Post and the Enquirer decided to do articles about the Bat Boys. So they come in and they take our picture, and this is a picture you can see Bat Boys meet the big stars, and we're all quoted down there in some meaner fashion on that. And then this is the other one, Bat Boy's job is glamorous, drudgery, and hard work. Now, a little side note, 4 of us have reconnected, and we get together about every quarter now. We just set up a date in April to get together. There's myself, Jim Workey, who worked in the clubhouse all 3 years I was there. Tom Niebuhr, who's from Moeller, he was the right field ball boy. And incidentally, Tom, because we were all on the field in 1972 for the National League Championship Series, he was the last guy to toss with Roberto Clemente in a Major League Stadium.
Wow, that's neat.
And he never realized that until we told him. And then, so Tom's from Moeller, and then Gus Gooden, if you remember, his dad was police chief during that time, and Gus was the visitors bat boy. So Gus has a lot of other stories that are really interesting, and we have done, and probably will do, kind of like some type of presentation out of the Reds Hall of Fame later on this year. We have a lot of time, a lot of fun doing that. So these are just some pictures my mom took. Bernie always left her tickets, and you can see they were pretty good tickets. Just us working before the game, during batting practice, then working then during the game, and then after the game. Now we would work, I talked a little bit about the pay before, it was low. First year at Crosley Field, we got $5 for a single game, and $7 for a doubleheader. Remember those double headers they used to play, right? Well, when we moved to Riverfront, we got a big pay raise. We got $7 for a game and $10 for a doubleheader. And we would be down there about 10, 12, sometimes 14 hours a day. Sometimes if it was a night game that went extremely late, we would just stay in the clubhouse and sleep there, especially if it was a day game following the night game. So we spent a lot of time down there. This is a picture of, there were actually 6 of us down there. The 4 of us that get together, you can see Gus in the Philadelphia Phillies uniform, top row, and Jim Workey without the uniform is next to him. And then I'm in the bottom row on your extreme left, and then Tom Niebuhr is in the middle. We haven't been able to connect with the other 2 guys, but the 4 of us have a great time when we get together. And the stories get better every time we get together. There's a picture of Bernie with the Bat Boys. Again, all these pictures are courtesy of my mom. Now, picture of Joe and Pete. Got a story about this. Bernie gets a phone call from Bob Housen, who's at the winter meetings in 1971. And typical Bob Housen, he's the president and CEO of the Reds, so he could have ordered Bernie to do whatever he wanted, and that would have been the end of it. But that wasn't Bob's way. Bob says, Bernie, we've made a trade with Houston, we've acquired these players, we've given up these players. When you assign the lockers in spring training and at Riverfront, I want you to do me a favor. And of course Bernie said, yes sir, what can I do for you, Mr. Housen? He said, I want you to put Joe next to Pete. Now Joe Morgan had a probably an unfair criticism in Houston of being sometimes a moody ball player when he would get into slumps, and it would affect his overall game. But a lot of that came from the manager at the time, who happened to be Harry Walker. And Harry seemed to have problems with some of the black players he managed. So I think that trade turned out pretty good, don't you? So these are some of the things that the sports writers wrote about the Reds trading away their leadership in Lee May and Tommy Helms, and that was exactly true. They were two of the leaders. They'd come up through the Reds farm system. Tommy had been with Pete for a long time, and they were very popular role players. And I especially liked Tommy because I didn't have to wear my old spikes. Tommy and I had the same size shoe, and so I would break in Tommy's spikes. So I always had a good-looking pair of spikes, because you want to look good when you're on the field. Now, the funny thing is, if you read Bob Hertzel, and I'll just go to the best quote. If the United States had traded Dwight Eisenhower to the Germans during World War II, it wouldn't have been much different than trading May and Helms to Houston. Now, Bob Hertzel still owns that because it's in print and he laughs about it. But that's pretty strong stuff. There's a picture of Joe and Pete and me a few years ago. So I told you about Tommy Spikes. So when he got traded, I was a little bit upset. Now, I wasn't as upset as Tom Niebuhr, the right field ball boy. Tom was so upset, he called Bernie and said, I'm not sure I'm going to come back next year because I'm so mad about this trade. Bernie says, well, take a couple days and let me know if you're coming back or not. So Tom thought about it for a couple days, and he came back, and he's pretty glad he did. But I thought, oh, you know, it's 72, that's my last year. I'm going to go to college. This is my last year being down here. I'm going to have to wear my cruddy old spikes. Nope. Joe and I were pretty much the same size, same shoes. So I broke in Joe's shoes in 72. So I guess I was the second baseman that, helping out the Reds second baseman during that time.
Wow, that's neat.
National League Championship Series, everybody remembers that, or if you were too young, you've been told about that, right? I mean, here we are now, the Pirates are defending world champs. They're 3 outs away from going back to the World Series, and they've got the best closer in the National League on the mound in Dave Justy. And things weren't looking too good for the Reds, but Johnny comes up and hits a game-tying home run. And the one thing I like to point out too is a lot of times home runs will end rallies, but the guy that batted right after Johnny was Tony Perez, and Tony got a base hit, and he was eventually pitched run by George Foster, and we all know what happened next.
Right.
Ritter Collette, there's an article there. As you can see my best side there. Great, congratulating Johnny, along with a lot of the other ball players, and Bernie. Bernie's in that picture too. This was a picture that was given to me by a UPI guy. This is right after Foster scored the winning run, and I'm right next to Joe, and right behind me is Jim McLaughlin, and then behind Jim is Johnny Bench. But the guy that you can't see is Ed Sprague, who is getting ready to hoist George Foster up. And of course, Hal McRae is just standing at home plate, just jumping up and down. And there's a picture of the celebration. Crowd's going crazy. It was amazing. So we celebrate, you know, I'm celebrating there, you can see. And I've got pretty good hops in that picture. For some of my buddies in the back, they probably haven't seen me ever jump that high. But all of a sudden, it's like, oh my goodness, there's fans on the field. So Tom and I rush over to the dugout, and we're getting everything, hoping and praying nothing was stolen. What was a different time back then? Nothing was stolen. We didn't get fired. It was a good ending to that. But I do want to play this for you. If it works here.
Point it at the left.
What's
Point at the left.
okay?
1 and 2. The 1. And a bench to bench. Change in the air. Deep right field.
tired of seeing that. I'm sure you don't either. This is a picture of the Reds clubhouse after that game. You can see them spraying Sparky Anderson with champagne. I have bottles, empty bottles of course, of the champagne from the 1970-1972 seasons. Again, I've loaned them down to the Reds Hall of Fame. Now you'll notice when you watch the celebrations on TV now, everybody has goggles on.
Right.
Okay, believe me, if we had goggles, I'd have worn one too because champagne stings in your eyes. But we had to clean up the clubhouse afterwards. So we had to stay all night and we had to clean up the clubhouse to get ready for the World Series. But we didn't complain one bit, let me tell you. I do want to talk a little bit about Roberto Clemente. Since I grew up in Clarksburg and listened to a lot of the Pirates game before we moved to Cincinnati, Roberto Clemente was my favorite non-Reds player. I remember watching him on TV and just an amazing player and even a more amazing person. And the fact that all of us were on the field for his last game is just surreal. I still remember when we found out his death on New Year's Eve, and that was just horrible. But Major League Baseball did the right thing and immediately elected him to the Hall of Fame. So we go on to the 1972 World Series. It starts in Cincinnati. And in Game 2, Jackie Robinson, in his last public appearance, throws out the pitch to Johnny Bench. And there's another picture of Jackie throwing it out. So Jim Workey, who was in the clubhouse, got to meet the president in the clubhouse and all the Secret Service guys. So that's his story. Tom, the right field ball boy, and myself, all our story is we got to meet Jackie Robinson.
Wow.
Which is really when I think about it, it's just an awesome thing to have experience in your life. And unfortunately, Jackie passed away a couple weeks later. This is a picture of me getting ready to travel with the team. Got the red suitcase there that was on loan to me, and you can't see the hotel bill, but it was quite cheap compared to today's prices. So this is all the guys in Oakland. The first picture on the left, you can see Jim Workey, then you can see myself, and then the second picture, there's me and Tom. And a funny thing, we were in the dugout before the game, and these fans started tossing baseballs down to us to have us sign them. We kind of looked at one another. We looked at coaches, George Sugar and Alex Gramlis were there, and we said, well, what should we do? And they said, I'll go ahead and sign them. They said, they'll have fun figuring out who you are anyway. And we check into the hotel at Oakland, and of course, I'm the bat boy, the hotel room's in my name, and we walk in, and there's 2 beds. And the guys, Jim and Tom, look at one another, and they look at me, and they said, well, what are we going to do about this? I said, well, I don't know about you. That's not a me problem, that's a you problem. My name's on the room. So they made arrangements. We had a couple rainouts in Oakland. You can see they're interviewing Big Clue, and then you can see the water in the dugout. So after a couple rainouts, all of a sudden I woke up one morning, and I don't know why I was thinking this, but I was having a panic attack. I went, oh my goodness, we're going to continue to get rained out. I'm going to get kicked out of Miami University, and what am I qualified to do? Can I be Bat Boy my entire life? This is just a good picture of Sparky and Pete in Oakland before one of the games. Everybody's congratulating Clay Carroll on saving one of the games in Oakland. As you can see, got my better half again. These are some pictures taken off of the World Series video. This is actually during Game 6 when the Reds beat Vita Blue pretty convincingly. And we had a lot of confidence going into Game 7 that we were gonna take the series. Another picture in the dugout during Game 6. Now the players, each one of them had a different way. If they would walk, Pete would always flip the bat in the air to me. Some of the players would just lay it on the ground. Johnny always waited till I got out there, and he always handed me the bat. So there's a picture of Johnny handing me the bat in the World Series. Now this picture is at the end of the World Series tape, and the reason I have it on there is you can see the Oakland A's celebrating. Still gives me a stomach ache because the Reds lost by 1 run. But 6 of those 7 games were one-run games, which is still a World Series record. And that is, the reason I have that picture up there is that is me walking off the field the last time as Reds Bat Boy. So I told you about our great pay we got and working all those hours. Well, unbeknownst to us, the players had a players' meeting and they voted on World Series share. Now, the first time it happened in 1970, Woody Woodward was the player rep, and he calls us in, and nobody else is in the clubhouse. Everybody's out on the field or on the bench. Bernie's not there, just Woody and the 3 of us. And we're sitting there going, we know we're going to the postseason, and we're going, are we going to get fired? Is somebody else coming in to take our place? What's going on? Well, Woody tells us that the players have voted, and they know how hard we worked, and we would run errands for them and basically do anything they wanted. We were there before the first player got in the clubhouse, and we were there after the last player left. So each of us got a quarter of a series share. So in 1970, that was a little bit over $2,500, which was a lot of money for a 16-year-old kid, let me tell you. And then the same thing happened in 1972. Now, we did not expect this either. The player rep at that time was Darrell Cheney. Now, Jim Werke and I had been through this in 1970, so we were hoping that we were going to get some money too. We had no idea they were going to vote us another quarter share. But Tom had not been through this before, and Tom was asking, what's going on? And Jim and I looked at one another and said, oh, we're getting fired, Tom. Pack your bags now. You have about 30 minutes to leave the clubhouse. So I used those 2 World Series checks to help pay for my college education at Miami University. Then after college, I get hired in the Reds ticket office. So we're working in the ticket vault when there were physical tickets. We had to count, if you do the math, 56,000 times 81 dates. We're responsible for all those tickets. And Marcia, my lovely wife, she gets hired to sell season tickets. And then an opportunity springs up for her to run the scoreboard. So she ran the scoreboard for 3 years down at Riverfront Stadium for both the Reds and the Bengals. It's a picture of Marcia. They did an article about her in the Cincinnati Enquirer magazine, which was pretty cool. And this is when everybody would come to the stadium introducing the scoreboard crew to the fans. Now, Marcia learned a lot about baseball when she was working down there because there were 2 guys who were ex-pitchers. One was Charlie Taylor, who had pitched in the minor leagues before hurting his arm. And the second one was Brooks Lawrence. Everybody remember Brooks Lawrence? So Marcia came to appreciate that a 1-0 baseball game is an exciting baseball game. And it still is. It's a picture of a newspaper article about Marcia getting, her parents were, she was from Lexington, her parents lived in Lexington, so we had the wedding down in Lexington. Now, my story with the Reds starts in 1970. Marcia's family story starts a little bit earlier than that. This is a picture of Marcia's aunt. We called her Aunt Oni, and then Marcia's mom. And these 2 ladies were huge baseball fans. And they were also first cousins to Reds great Paul Derringer. So when they graduated from high school in Springfield, Kentucky, Paul brought them up to Cincinnati, to the big city. so they could find work. So Paul kind of took them under their wing. And, you know, Paul, along with the team from the 39 and 40, they were as big as celebrities as Pete and Johnny and Tony and Joe were back in the 70s. So that's a pretty cool story. It's a picture of Paul Derringer with his kick. He is the only Reds pitcher in baseball, in Reds history, to win Game 7. And that was done at home. Very few times, if you look back, the last 3 World Series champions have been won in Boston, in New York, and in Oakland. So to win one at home is pretty special. Paul's also famous for pitching the first night game in Major League Baseball history.
Which is me. Yeah.
And there's a picture of the Reds after they won the series, and Paul's right in the center. He pitched a complete game to win the series. So I went to work for Premium Travel Services in the 90s, and we happened to get the Reds travel during the 1990 season.
Wow.
So we advertised and handled their travel, handled fan trips to spring training into the regular season, and it was pretty special. So you know, you look back and you say, well, I really started with the Reds in 70, and in different capacities I worked for them through 79. Then our travel company handled the 1990. Maybe the current ownership group should put me on payroll. I don't know. Based on their past history, I would be all for that. We also, during that year, 1990, had a Big Red Machine reunion where we had a game at Old Crosley Field out in Blue Ash. It was kind of funny. There's a funny backstory to this. So the Reds were playing the Dodgers that weekend, which was appropriate because of the big rivalry the Dodgers and the Reds were in the 70s. And they were going to bring everybody out on the field prior to the game. But Marchot had a problem with Bob Housen, who attended the reunion, of being brought out too. And she kind of said, well, we're not going to allow Bob Housen to come out on the field with the team.
Why?
But we'll have to ask Marge about that. So Johnny went to the rest of the players, and they came back and told Marge, if Bob Housen doesn't go out on the field, nobody's going out on the field. So guess what? Bob Housen went out on the field. Again, this is the advertisement we had. We had a big dinner down at the Montgomery Boathouse down on the river. Everything was done first class, and everything, it meant a lot for those players. The one thing I'll always remember is we had the players checked into the hotel in Covington, and when they were walking to their room, we had their uniforms laid out on the bed. And I remember talking to Ed Armbrister, who has since passed away, and Ed said when he saw his uniform, he broke down and cried. So I guess we did it upright. So on my 40th birthday, Marcia takes me, surprises me. I go down to fantasy camp and attempt to be a ball player. My manager was Tommy Helms, so I didn't have to break in his spikes, by the way. I had my own back then. My other manager was Pat Zachary, and they were great. Here's Marcia and I at, I believe this is when we were at Pete's induction into the Reds Hall of Fame.
Oh.
So our son's getting married. So I worked the last year, it was the last half season at Crossley and then moved to Riverfront. Our son worked for the Reds in stadium operations the last year at Riverfront and the first year at Great American Ballpark.
Wow.
So I think that's pretty cool. So we were deciding on what we wanted to do for a rehearsal dinner. And actually this was Marcia's idea. She said, well, why don't we check the stadium? Because nothing's inexpensive these days, so we'll check the stadium and see what they have to offer. So we talked to Amanda and Kyle. They said, great, let's do it. So we had the rehearsal dinner down at the Reds. So in the meantime, I had met Marty, and I had told him that we were going to have a rehearsal dinner down there, and I said, you know, it would mean a lot to the kids if you could come over right before the game. he said, well, I can't guarantee it, but I'll see what we can do. And I said, also, we'd like to introduce you to Marcia's mom and aunt with their past history with the Reds and being such big fans. So sure enough, Marty did come over and stayed for a couple minutes and just had the best time, and I'm eternally grateful for Marty for doing that. So you can see Marcia, Marty, myself, that's our son Kyle, and his lovely wife Amanda. So if you remember back, I think 2016 or so, when the Reds were sponsoring Pete's Hits, well, I decided, oh, that would be pretty neat. So I went on the Reds website to see what hits I could sponsor. And it occurred to me that I'm going to look up and see what the last hit Pete got when I was on the field as Bat Boy. So, of course, now, all the postseason hits don't count towards his career total, only regular season. So Pete got 2 hits the last game of the 1972 season, and this is the second hit he got, which is hit number 1922. Now, Pete ended up with more than 4,000 hits, so that proves at least one thing, that I'm very old. There's a certificate of ownership of the hit, of Pete's hit. There's a picture of Pete and I in 1972, my final year as Bat Boy. And there's a picture of Pete and I, or Pete and me, rather, when he was signing all the stuff, when everybody was buying the hits. So I waited till everybody had left. And then I go up and talk to Pete, and after exchanging pleasantries, the first question he asked me was, how's your mom? Still remembered that it was my mom who got me the job. And on the table there, there's some memorabilia, but there's a signed Pete Rose bat and a signed Pete Rose ball to my mom. And then he says to me, I still remember you used your money, the World Series money, for college. And we thought that was pretty cool. So Pete has a great memory. If you ever listen to him talk, he can probably tell you, what hit he got, who the pitcher was, what the day of the week was, what the temperature was. It's amazing, his memory. And when Pete was at the Hall of Fame just recently, Marcia and I got an invite to go down there and got a chance to talk with Pete, and it was just a very special night. It brought back memories because the room was full. And I remember after a game, of course, with Pete and Joe being right next to one another, there was a locker separating them because of the mail they would get. But the press after the game would just be crowded around Pete and Joe, and Pete especially would just hold court with the press. And when he came in and was talking to the people down at the Hall of Fame, I had flashbacks because he had not. Now, he's 82 and he's got the ailments of everybody that's that age, but he has not lost anything as far as controlling the room and just holding court. It was really something to see. This is one of the champagne bottles I was telling you about earlier. That's down at the Reds Hall of Fame. There's the Adirondack bat that I have from Willie Mays. You can see it's the 1970 All-Star Game, Riverfront Stadium with the date. Picture of me now that I'm retired, I'm doing speaking on behalf of the Reds Hall of Fame and on behalf of the Joe Nuxall Miracle League. And I just feel very fortunate to be able to tell my story in front of groups like you. If you would have told, back when we get together, we were just dumb kids back then, 16, 17, 18-year-olds. We didn't know what was going on because we had thought, if you'd have told me in 1969 I was going to be Reds Bat Boy and the Reds would lose 100 games the next 3 years. Now, they had not lost 100 games in their franchise history before then. I said, fine, I'll take that. But to be able to go to work an All-Star game and to go to 2 World Series and have the experiences that we had back then, it just kind of boggles our mind to this day, and we have such a great appreciation of that now. If you look over there, there's my Bat Boy uniform that Bernie Stowe gave me we used to exchange Christmas gifts. So Bernie gave me the uniform, the top, but he didn't give me the Bat Boy pants, because the Bat Boy pants were pretty big for me. I was a little bit thinner back then, as we all were, right? Well, one day before a game, I was talking to Bernie in the clubhouse, and Joe Morgan says, "Brownie, come here." And I come over there, and I was dressed in my Bat Boy uniform. He looks at my pants, and he goes, "You look like shit." He said, "Hold on a minute." He goes, "I might have something for you." So he goes in there and gets a pair of his pants, which had been ripped and sewn back up, because he, still, probably sliding. And he says, "Try these on. These will probably fit you." But Joe and I were pretty much the same size, and they fit really good. So I wore them that night, and I'm looking pretty good, a lot better than I did before. And so the next day, we're distributing the uniforms, because I'm coming back from the dry cleaners. And Bernie says, "Well, here's Morgan's pants." And I said, "No, Joe gave them to me. I wore them last night." You're right. So Bernie waits till all the players are in there after batting practice, and he turns off the music, and he gets out in the middle of the clubhouse and said, "I just want to let all you effing prima donna players know you've turned my Bat Boy into an effing prima donna bat." So several years later, when Bernie gave me my uniform, he gave me my top, and he gave me Joe's pants. So really, when you look back on our history, our family's history, it started in 1933 when Paul Derringer was traded from the Cardinals to the Reds. And our relationship with the Reds, in a lot of different capacities, changed over the years, but it still is on today. And I'm very honored to have been able to speak to you tonight and tell you some of my stories and my experiences about being Bat Boy for the Big Red Machine. Thank you very much. Any questions?
So did the visiting team provide the visiting Bat Boy with the uniform, or did the Reds have a uniform for each team?
No, the visiting team provided, and Gus Gooden has a funny story about that, because he said, first of all, he said some of the teams would come in with different uniforms, and Gus was much bigger than I was. But the Mets came in with just one Bat Boy, and the pants were really tight on Gus. And the players would give Gus all kinds of grief, like, you better not bend over in those pants, Gus. But yeah, they would bring in the uniforms for the different Bat Boys throughout the league.
Do you happen to remember anything from being on the bench in the '72 World Series, like specifically about like how good a series Gene Tennis was having? Did you hear anybody bitching about what the hell we're going to do with that guy?
Really, I mean, what the hell are we going to do with that guy? You're right. I mean, when you look at his regular season and then the series, he just got hot. And if I was still collecting baseball cards and riding a bike, I would put his card in the spokes. Yes, sir.
How did you make it work being you're in high school and all these games and getting your homework done and all that stuff?
Hey, we were 16, 17, and 18. We could go on no sleep. I did have an agreement, as long as I kept my grades up, I could schedule study hall my last period, and then I could leave and not go to study hall. So I was able to keep my grades up, and we just made it work. Do whatever you needed to do.
Yeah.
Any other questions? The gentleman in the back.
You don't want to call.
Well, I'll call on you anyway. This guy worked on the ground crew and has a lot of good stories himself.
Which is what I'm going to ask about. Now, you for a short time, in between your other jobs with the Reds, you worked as a groundskeeper with Chip and I.
Yes.
What was, you had relationships in the clubhouse too, which is what we loved. It was like, Brown, go in there and get us some food.
You're right.
Yeah, you're right. But what was one of your favorite moments
I think just having that relationship still with the players, even though I wasn't Bat Boy, and continuing till today. I know a funny story. I was at the Moeller card show a couple of years ago, and Johnny Bench was giving autographs, and Johnny had come in early. And I was talking to a friend of ours who had come in from Florida to participate in the card show. And he said, "Have you seen Johnny? He came in early." And I said, "Well, I went over there." So I went over there, and there's a big line. And so I'm going, okay, how do I work this? And I'm kind of figuring out who the guy's in charge. So I wait till he comes back over, and I said, "Hey, listen, I used to be Bat Boy for the Reds. I just want to say hi to Johnny. I don't need anything autographed. I've got his autograph. I just want to say hi. I haven't seen him in a while." And so he says, "Well, wait here." So he goes over to where Johnny's sitting, and he's got his handler there. And all of a sudden he's talking to, and then all of a sudden Johnny looks up and goes, "Brownie, get over here." All these people waiting in line are probably going, "Who the heck is this guy?" But that's, you know, the relationships that I've maintained throughout the years with players that's really the most special thing I hold on to. And I'm sure you do too, John.
Yeah, I think it's great. But the other thing, one time you talked about what a hard worker you were, and you were. But when you got to the ground school, you kind of got a little soft. Tell everybody about the job that you and I had, because we've been friends since first grade.
Yes.
But we got put together.
Well, you know, I get on the ground crew, and all of a sudden I get this big raise because we're part of a union. And it's like, whoa, this is pretty neat. And so right before you would break down, after batting practice, we'd go out and put the bases in. So John and I would specifically go to second base. And we would kind of be looking around to see what everybody else was doing. And I would kind of get some dirt out of the hole, look around, put some dirt in, get some dirt out of the hole again. And then when everything else was done, then we'd put second base in. So that was what we used to do.